Thank you. You know, we have staffs that help us with our comments because we're spread a little thin. But I took some notes during this hearing and I wanted to share them with you. So you hear members from each party make claims and then they cite statistics and studies. And if you had lived on another planet or another galaxy and you came to this hearing, you'd be scratching your head going, I don't know who to believe. So let's just talk about some indisputable facts. Number one, inflation is now at a 40-year high. Nobody can dispute that. Number two, interest rates are now at a 22-year high. That is also indisputable. Real weekly earnings have exceeded annual inflation for 5 of the 31 months, 84% of the time, during this administration. And if you want to talk about generational wealth, generational wealth is built on a foundation of 3 things to start. Number 1, graduate high school. Number 2, have a full-time job. And number 3, do not have children until you're married. If you do those 3 tenets, regardless of race, religion, creed, region that you live in, it's very difficult to live below the poverty line. I'm sure CNN or MSNBC will find somebody that did all those 3 things and is below the poverty line, but it is absolutely the exception and not the rule. Then we talk about only the only federal spending program that progressive members ever want to talk about cutting is defense. That is the only one. Now, they ignore the fact that we live in a very small world, a very dangerous world, and a very interconnected world. When you cut defense, and while they're all too comfortable, in fact, perfectly comfortable with cutting defense, they're also willing to give Ukraine a blank check for Ukrainian defense, which I find a little bit hypocritical, or at least inconsistent. And then when you look at, say, 2022's deficit, which is the debt for that particular year, it was $1.38 trillion. So if we didn't spend $1 on defense, we'd still have over $500 billion in deficit spending. Defense is not the issue. In fact, defense has been the slowest growing major federal spending category since 2000. And even that 2000 year base, that base year, was following 10 years of post-Cold War cuts. So the U.S. military, as a share of GDP, remains the lowest level since World War II. So more spending is not the solution to inflation, because if all of those spending programs worked as well as my Democratic colleagues have claimed, well, why did we stop at $3 or $4 trillion of spending? Why didn't we spend $40 trillion if it's so good? And then let's talk about, because the American people or my friend from the other galaxy that attended this hearing need to see contrasts. So my colleague and ranking member mentioned about student loans. Said that student loan forgiveness she fully supports. Well, I completely disagree, because it's not student loan forgiveness, it's student loan transfer. First, that program would cost, general consensus is it cost about $400 billion. And it would benefit, ironically, the highest earners will reap about 2/3 of that benefit, of the giveaway. And then you have to think about, what about the folks that had never went to college? What about the folks that went to college and didn't take out a loan? What about the folks that went to college, took out the loan, and then paid it back? Is that fair to them? And the answer to that question is, of course, no. It's patently unfair. It's patently un-American, in fact. The outstanding federal loan debt is about $1.7 trillion. There's 255 million adult Americans. 45 million have student loan debt. So that would make it that 210 million adult Americans would have to bear the burden for not this forgiveness, but this transfer. And the median borrower, they did a study in 1992, and they just recently did another study, and they have found the same thing, that about 4% of their monthly income is spent on student loans. They got plenty of money to pay off their loans. And it also sets a horrible precedent to folks that willingly went into an agreement to say, I'll borrow money and I promise to pay it back. And then what about future borrowers that say, hey, they give the loan forgiveness, I'll sign this thing, but I'm probably going to get forgiveness in the future, or again, more accurately, transfer. It's simply unfair. And so we have to recognize the fact that we do have a $33 trillion debt. And I believe, from CBO, that if we continue to spend at the rate we're going now, that in 10 years, half of the federal budget will go to loan repayment, will go to paying service on the debt. That means that there's going to be less money for defense, there'll be less money for infrastructure, and there'll be less money, ironically, for entitlements. So I remember this very hyperbolic commercial that some organization put out where you had an actor playing Paul Ryan, and he was pushing grandma off the cliff. Well, it seems to me that folks that don't want to address this runaway spending, which would be my Democratic colleagues, or at least most of them, are proverbially, hyperbolically, are they pushing grandma off the cliff? Because it's going to be a heck of a lot less money for entitlements if we don't get our fiscal house in order. I want to thank the witnesses for coming today. Thank you for your testimony and your knowledge and sharing your points of view. And with that, and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. If there is no further business and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.